Sometimes fate chooses the most brutal moments to reveal its greater purpose. On a moonless December night in Pine Valley, Colorado, where the winter wind howled through snow-laden pine trees, destiny was about to unfold on Route 156. The endless stretch of mountain highway had become Michael Anderson's familiar companion during his late-night drives. At 58, his failing eyesight made these nocturnal journeys increasingly challenging, but tonight's emergency prescription refill couldn't wait until morning. The forecasted blizzard would make tomorrow's drive impossible, and he couldn't risk running out of his heart medication. The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. as Mike's old Ford F-150 crawled along the snow-dusted asphalt. The truck's headlights carved twin paths through the thickening snowfall, while the radio crackled with warnings of deteriorating weather conditions. 4 years of solitude since losing Jennifer had taught Mike to find comfort in such moments of isolation, but tonight felt different. The air seemed charged with an inexplicable tension that made his shoulders tight and his hands gripped the steering wheel more firmly than usual. 23 years as a high school counselor had taught Mike to trust his instincts about approaching trouble. Those same instincts now screamed at him as a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, approaching far too quickly for these treacherous conditions. The vehicle, a dark SUV, weaved erratically across the center line, its high beams flashing irregularly through the swirling snow. Mike eased his truck toward the shoulder, giving the approaching vehicle plenty of room to pass. As the SUV drew alongside, time seemed to slow. Through his passenger window, Mike caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of fur, a glimpse of terrified eyes, and then his world exploded into chaos. The sound would haunt his dreams for months to come. The distinct thud of bodies hitting the pavement, followed by pain-filled yelps that cut through the winter night like knives. The SUV's taillights vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing but swirling snow and those heart-wrenching cries. Mike's hands moved before his mind could process what he'd witnessed. The truck's brake lights painted the falling snow crimson. As he pulled onto the shoulder, hands trembling as he reached for the hazard lights. Years of counseling students in crisis had honed his ability to remain calm in emergency situations. But this was different. "Dear God," he whispered, fumbling for the magnetic flashlight he kept mounted on the dashboard. His counselor's training kicked in automatically. Document everything. Even through the chaos of the moment, he forced himself to focus on the SUV's license plate. Colorado plates, starting with XLK. The rest had been lost to the darkness and snow. The bitter wind bit through his jacket as Mike stepped out of the truck, but he barely noticed the cold. The beam of his flashlight swept across the road and his heart nearly stopped. There in the middle of the highway lay a large German shepherd mix, her fur matted with snow and something darker that Mike refused to acknowledge as blood. As he approached, her head lifted weakly, and their eyes met. In that moment, Mike saw something that broke through the protective emotional walls he'd built since Jennifer's death, a mother's desperate worry for her children. Then he heard them, tiny whimpers carried on the wind. His flashlight beam revealed the full horror of the situation. 4 puppies, no more than a few weeks old, scattered across the asphalt like discarded toys. The sight struck him with physical force, momentarily stealing his breath. "Hold on," he called softly, his voice catching. "Just hold on." The mother dog's eyes never left him as he approached, speaking in the same gentle tones he'd used countless times with frightened students. "I'm here to help. Let me help you." Whether it was his voice or some deeper understanding, she made no move to stop him as he drew closer. The snow was falling harder now, but Mike could see the mother dog was injured. Her left front leg lay at an unnatural angle, and blood stained the snow beneath her. Yet even in her pain, her eyes kept darting to her puppies, and soft whines of concern escaped her throat. Moving quickly but carefully, Mike removed his heavy winter coat. The wind immediately cut through his sweater, but survival training from his Colorado childhood kicked in. In an emergency, keeping others warm could be more critical than your own comfort. "Let's get your babies safe first," he told the mother. Dog, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to her. One by one, he gathered the puppies. Each tiny life he lifted from the snow felt like a miracle. They were cold and frightened, but somehow, incredibly, all four seemed to have survived the fall. He created a nest with his coat in the truck's passenger footwell, carefully arranging the shivering puppies together for warmth. The mother dog watched every movement, her eyes never leaving her puppies. When Mike returned to her, she made a valiant attempt to stand, but her injured leg gave way. "Easy, girl," he soothed, noting how she favored her left side. "Let me help you." For a moment, as he slipped his arms beneath her, Mike was transported back to his last moments with Jennifer, carrying her from the car to their bed when she became too weak to walk. The memory, instead of bringing its usual sharp pain, filled him with determination. This time he could help. This time he could make a difference. The mother dog was heavy, at least 70 pounds, but adrenaline lent him strength. Getting her into the cab proved challenging, but somehow he managed, settling her on the passenger seat where she could see her puppies below. As he closed the door and hurried around to the driver's side, his mind was already calculating. The nearest emergency vet was in Marshall, 40 minutes away in good weather. Tonight, with the snow, his prescription would have to wait. If you believe in the power of compassion to change lives, hit that subscribe button and join our community of hope. Don't forget to ring that notification bell to never miss another story of everyday heroes making extraordinary differences. Together, we can inspire more acts of kindness in our world. The dashboard clock's soft green glow illuminated Mike's weathered face as he navigated the treacherous mountain roads toward Marshall. Each curve brought fresh challenges as the snow continued its relentless descent, but his mind wandered to the path that had led him to this moment. The quiet breaths of the injured mother dog beside him and the occasional whimpers from her puppies below formed a soundtrack to his memories. 4 years earlier, Mike's world had revolved around two things: his work as a high school counselor and his life with Jennifer. Their modest ranch house on Cedar Creek Road had been filled with plans for the future: weekend projects, garden redesigns, and dreams of fostering troubled teens once they both retired. Jennifer had always been the one to push him toward bigger dreams, to believe they could make a real difference in their small mountain community. The cancer had changed everything. It came swiftly and without mercy, transforming their plans for golden years into a desperate race against time. Mike had taken leave from his position at Pine Valley High to care for her, learning to navigate the complex world of medications, treatments, and eventually hospice care. The students he'd counseled through their own losses had sent cards and letters, their words of comfort now feeling hollow as he faced his own grief. The mother dog shifted slightly in her seat, drawing a sharp breath that pulled Mike back to the present. Her eyes, filled with a pain he recognized all too well, met his in the dim light. "Almost there," he assured her, though Marshall's lights were still hidden behind curtains of snow. The words felt familiar. How many times had he whispered those same assurances to Jennifer during their final months together? The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulating snow as Mike's thoughts drifted to his last day at Pine Valley High, just 3 months ago. Principal Roberts had arranged a retirement ceremony in the gymnasium, where hundreds of current and former students gathered to share stories of how his guidance had impacted their lives. Mike had stood at the podium, throat tight with emotion, unable to shake the feeling that he was abandoning them. But the panic attacks had become too frequent, the weight of others' pain too heavy to bear, while his own grief remained unprocessed. A particularly loud whimper from one of the puppies drew his attention to the footwell. Through the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of movement as the tiny bodies huddled closer together in his coat. The sight stirred memories of the crisis, intervention training he'd received early in his career. How many times had he sat with students who felt thrown away, discarded by the very people who should have protected them? He'd always found the right words then, drawing from some deep well of compassion that Jennifer had helped him discover within himself. But since her death, that well had run dry. The big ranch house echoed with emptiness, its rooms filled with half-finished projects and fading dreams. His neighbors, Emma Wright and the Pattersons, had tried to draw him out of his isolation, inviting him to community events and dropping by with casseroles that grew cold in his refrigerator. Their kindness felt like sandpaper against his raw grief, and gradually they'd learned to leave him alone. The mother dog's labored breathing pulled Mike's focus back to the road ahead.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her strength and determination to protect her puppies despite her own injuries stirred something in him, a recognition of the fierce love that drives one to push through unbearable pain. He thought of the countless times he'd witnessed similar strength in his students, the young girl who cared for her siblings while their mother battled addiction, the boy who worked 2 jobs to help his family after his father's accident, the teenager who refused to give up on her dreams despite living out of a car. Route 156 stretched endlessly before them, its familiar curves now treacherous with ice and snow. Mike leaned forward, straining to see through the thickening storm. The mother dog's eyes remained alert despite her pain, watching each turn of the wheel as if she understood their journey's importance. Her puppies had grown quieter, whether from the truck's warmth or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Pine Valley had been his home for over 3 decades, ever since he and Jennifer had arrived fresh out of college, full of idealistic plans to make a difference. The small mountain town had embraced them, becoming the community they'd always dreamed of finding. Jennifer had taught art at the elementary school, transforming blank hallways into galleries of student creativity. Mike had found his calling in the counselor's office, creating a safe haven for students struggling to find their place in the world. The truck's heater fought against the bitter cold seeping through the windows. Mike glanced at the mother dog, noting how she maintained her protective vigilance despite her obvious pain. Her dedication reminded him of his last conversation with Jennifer, just days before she passed. "Promise me," she'd whispered, her voice weak but determined. "Promise me you won't close your heart. There's so much more love left in you to give." Dorm! He hadn't kept that promise. Instead, he'd retreated into himself, turning his spacious ranch house into a fortress of solitude. The garden Jennifer had lovingly tended withered and died. The spare bedroom they'd planned to use for fostering remained locked, gathering dust. Even his retirement felt less like a well-earned rest and more like a surrender to grief. A road sign emerged from the swirling snow. Marshall, 15 miles. The mother dog seemed to sense his relief, her tail offering a weak thump against the seat. One of her puppies, the one with the white chest, poked its head above the seat edge, earning a soft whine of concern from its mother. The sight triggered a memory of Jennifer surrounded by her elementary school students, that same mixture of worry and pride in her eyes as she watched them tackle new challenges. The storm intensified, snow now falling in thick curtains that transformed the familiar highway into an alien landscape. Mike's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the whiteout conditions. The weight of responsibility pressed against his chest. 5 lives depending on his ability to reach help through this blizzard. For the first time in years, he felt truly present, truly needed. His mind wandered to the locked spare room at home, still filled with the supplies they'd gathered for their fostering dreams. Jennifer had been so certain they could make a difference in children's lives, even after retirement. She'd spent months collecting furniture, books, and comfort items, creating a space of healing and hope. After her death, he couldn't bear to even open the door, let alone dismantle their shared vision. The mother dog's breathing had grown more labored, each exhale carrying a slight whimper that she seemed to try to suppress. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, never stopped checking on her puppies. Her determination stirred something deep within. Mike's soul, a recognition of the kind of love that transcends personal suffering, that puts others' needs first, despite overwhelming odds. Through the swirling snow, the lights of Marshall began to appear, distant beacons of hope in the darkness. The mother dog's ears perked slightly at the change in the truck's engine sound as Mike slowed to navigate the ice-slicked streets. Her trust in him, despite everything she'd endured, felt like both a gift and a challenge. Would he be worthy of it? Could he be the person she needed him to be in this moment? The last time he'd driven these streets was for Jennifer's final treatment, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that it was too late for anything but comfort care. Now, as he searched for signs directing him to the emergency veterinary hospital, he felt that same sense of desperate urgency, but this time tinged with hope. This time, perhaps, he could make a difference. Mountain View Emergency Animal Hospital emerged from the snowstorm like a lighthouse in a tempest, its illuminated sign cutting through the darkness. Mike guided his truck into the empty parking lot, tires crunching through fresh snow. The facility's windows glowed warmly, promising help within. As he killed the engine, the mother dog stirred, her eyes reflecting the building's lights with a glimmer of what Mike chose to interpret as hope. The night staff sprang into action the moment Mike burst through the doors, explaining the situation. Between labored breaths, Dr. Rachel Torres, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested she'd been sleeping in her office, took immediate control of the situation. Her calm efficiency reminded Mike of the trauma nurses he'd encountered during Jennifer's illness, their practiced hands hiding hearts that felt every patient's pain. "We'll need to assess them immediately," Dr. Torres said, following Mike to his truck. Her sharp intake of breath upon seeing the mother dog's condition betrayed her professional composure. This was deliberate. The question carried a weight of disbelief and anger that Mike understood all too well. The emergency team worked with practiced precision, carefully transferring the mother dog onto a stretcher. When they tried to separate her from her puppies, however, she became agitated, struggling despite her injuries. "Wait," Mike intervened, recognizing the fear in her eyes. "Let her see them. Let her know they're safe." Dr. Torres nodded, and a technician brought the puppies, still nestled in Mike's coat, within their mother's line of sight. The change was immediate. The mother dog relaxed, allowing the team to wheel her into the treatment area. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the examination room, the full extent of the mother dog's injuries became apparent. Her left front leg was indeed broken, but Dr. Torres's gentle examination revealed more: cracked ribs, internal bruising, and a deep laceration along her flank that would require numerous stitches. Throughout the examination, the mother dog remained stoically still, her eyes fixed on the carrier containing her puppies, which sat within her view on a nearby counter. "She'll need surgery," Dr. Torres explained, her fingers gently probing the broken leg. "The fracture is complex. We'll need to place pins to stabilize it." She paused, her expression softening as she watched the mother dog's unwavering attention to her puppies. The good news is, the puppies appear to be unharmed. They're about 6 weeks old, just starting to wean. Someone was caring for them until... She left the sentence unfinished, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Mike found himself sinking into a chair, the adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue beginning to ebb. The familiar weight of helplessness threatened to overwhelm him, but the mother dog's quiet strength kept him anchored in the present. She hadn't given up, so neither could he. "I'll cover the expenses," he heard himself say, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. Dr. Torres looked up from her examination, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? This will be significant. Surgery, aftercare, rehabilitation." The mother dog turned her head slightly, meeting Mike's gaze. In that moment, he saw Jennifer's eyes on their last night together, filled with a mixture of pain and trust that had haunted him for years. "I'm sure," he said firmly, "whatever it takes." As the team prepared for surgery, Mike found himself in the puppy examination room with a young veterinary technician named Sarah. She showed him how to bottle feed the puppies a special formula, explaining that they would need regular feedings until their mother recovered. The smallest puppy, a female with a distinctive brown spot over her eye, reminded him of a student he'd once counseled, tiny but tenacious, refusing to be overlooked. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of worry and waiting. Mike paced the small waiting room, his mind racing between concern for the mother dog and memories of similar vigils during Jennifer's illness. The snow continued to fall outside, transforming the parking lot into a blanket of white that matched his rising anxiety. Around 3 in the morning, Dr. Torres emerged from surgery, her scrubs bearing evidence of the complex procedure. "She's a fighter," she announced, a tired smile crossing her face. "The surgery went well, but we're not out of the woods yet. The next 24 hours will be critical." Mike nodded, absorbing the information with the same mixture of hope and fear he'd felt during Jennifer's treatments. "Can I see her?" he asked, surprising himself again with the depth of his investment in this dog's survival. Dr. Torres led him to the recovery area, where the mother dog lay on a heated bed, her newly bandaged leg supported by careful padding. Despite the anesthesia barely wearing off, her eyes fluttered open at their approach. Mike knelt beside her bed, letting her catch his scent. "Hey, brave girl," he whispered, his throat tight with emotion. "You did great." The white-chested puppy had managed to squirm its way out of the carrier again, demanding attention with tiny whimpers that echoed through the quiet facility. Sarah brought the entire carrier closer, allowing the mother dog to see all her puppies were safe. The relief in the dog's eyes was palpable, and she relaxed visibly, letting the pain medication pull her back into healing sleep. "You know," Dr. Torres said softly, watching the scene unfold, "we'll need to give her a name for our records." She paused, studying the sleeping dog's face. "She deserves something strong, something that reflects her spirit." Mike thought about the strength he'd witnessed tonight, the determination to protect her puppies despite devastating injuries, the trust she'd placed in him despite humanity's cruelty. "Grace," he said finally. "Her name is Grace." The name felt right, echoing through the quiet recovery room like a promise. It spoke of beauty in suffering, of dignity in the face of cruelty, of the kind of resilience Mike had always admired in his students, but had somehow lost touch with in himself. As the night deepened toward dawn, Mike found himself sharing the story with Dr. Torres and Sarah, not just of finding Grace and her puppies, but of Jennifer, of his early retirement, of the empty house full of abandoned dreams. The words flowed easier in the sterile confines of the animal hospital, witnessed only by sleeping dogs and people who understood the complex bonds between healing and hope. "You know," Dr. Torres said thoughtfully, checking Grace's vital signs, "one more time, we're always looking for volunteer support here at the emergency clinic, especially with cases like this, animals who need someone to advocate for them, to help them trust again." She glanced at Mike, letting the suggestion hang in the air. The idea settled into Mike's consciousness like a seed finding fertile soil. He thought of his empty days stretching ahead, of Jennifer's final request that he keep his heart open, of the locked room in his house waiting to fulfill its purpose of healing and hope. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, the first hints of dawn painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of possibility. Grace slept peacefully, her puppies finally quiet in their carrier nearby. For the first time in years, Mike felt the stirring of purpose, of a future that held more than memories and regret. The smallest puppy, the one with the brown spot over, her eye had wriggled free again, making her way determinedly toward Grace's bed. Mike gently scooped her up, cradling her close as she squirmed with puppy energy. "You don't give up easily, do you?" he murmured, recognizing in her determination a reflection of her mother's spirit. Dr. Torres watched the interaction with a knowing smile. "They all need names too," she pointed out. "These little ones are going to need a lot of care while Grace recovers. Special formula, socialization, medical monitoring." Mike looked down at the puppy in his arms, then at Grace, then back at the carrier holding the other 3 puppies. The weight of responsibility should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it felt like awakening, like stepping out of a dark room into unexpected sunlight. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Mike stood at the animal hospital's window, his reflection ghostly against the brightening sky, a cup of cooling coffee forgotten in his hands. The night's events felt almost dreamlike, but the steady beep of Grace's heart monitor anchored him firmly in reality. The morning staff had begun filtering in, each pausing to check on the night's emergency case. Word of Grace's story spread quickly through the hospital, drawing concerned looks and murmured conversations. Mike overheard fragments. "Thrown from a car. Saved her puppies. Lucky to be alive." Each retelling strengthened his resolve to see this through, whatever that might mean. Dr. Torres had finally gone home to rest, but not before giving Mike detailed instructions for bottle feeding the puppies. The white-chested troublemaker, whom Mike had started mentally calling Scout, required extra attention, constantly trying to climb out of the carrier to reach Grace. His determination reminded Mike of a student he'd once counseled, a boy who'd scaled the school fence every day to check on his sick mother during lunch breaks. Sarah, the veterinary technician, appeared at his elbow with fresh coffee and a gentle smile. "Grace's latest vitals are strong," she reported, replacing his cold cup with the steaming one. "She's responding well to the pain medication, and the incision sites look clean. But we need to talk about next steps." Next steps. The phrase hung in the air like mountain mist, full of possibilities and challenges. Mike followed Sarah to the recovery area where Grace lay sleeping. The morning light filtering through the windows cast warm patterns across her golden fur. Even in sleep, her face was turned toward the carrier holding her puppies. "The puppies need feeding every 3 hours, Sarah explained, demonstrating the proper technique with the formula. "They're old enough to start weaning, but with Grace's condition, we'll need to supplement their nutrition." She handed Mike a bottle, and together they fed each puppy, noting their different personalities. Scout, true to form, treated the bottle like a wrestling opponent. The smallest female, whom Mike had begun calling Penny for the copper-colored spot over her eye, approached feeding time with serious determination. The quiet male puppy, Shadow, took his time, but finished every drop, while Ruby, named for her reddish-brown coat, alternated between eager gulps and concerned glances toward her mother. As Mike cradled each puppy, memories of his counseling office surfaced. How many times had he held space for young souls dealing with trauma, learning to trust again? The parallel struck him suddenly. These puppies, like so many of his former students, needed someone to believe in their resilience, to guide them through darkness toward light. "I can't send them to a shelter," Mike said quietly, watching Scout attempt another escape from the carrier. The words surprised him, but they felt right, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Sarah's face softened with understanding. "They'll need round-the-clock care for several weeks," she cautioned. "Grace's recovery will be complicated. Physical therapy, medication schedules, wound care." She paused, studying his face. "Are you sure you're ready for that commitment?" Mike thought of his empty house, the locked spare room filled with abandoned dreams of fostering. He thought of Jennifer's final words about keeping his heart open. The answer came with unexpected clarity. "Yes, I'm sure." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Dr. Torres returned, having caught a few hours of sleep, to check on Grace and discuss home care requirements. The hospital's administrative staff helped Mike navigate paperwork and insurance options. Each step forward felt like crossing a threshold he hadn't known he was approaching. Emma Wright, Mike's neighbor, answered his early morning call with immediate concern. "Of course I'll help," she said without hesitation when he explained the situation. A retired teacher herself, Emma had always shared Jennifer's belief in the healing power of helping others. "I'll get the spare room ready. We'll need puppy pads, blankets, a gate for the doorway." Mike's throat tightened at her use of "we." How long had he kept himself isolated, turning away from offered friendship? Grace stirred on her bed, eyes opening to check on her puppies before drifting closed. Again, her instinct to protect, to nurture despite her own pain, echoed the community support he'd been too grief-stricken to accept. Steve Patterson from the hardware store arrived an hour later, his truck loaded with supplies. "Emma called," he explained, "simply helping Mike carry in puppy gates and bedding. We'll get the spare room set up proper, make it safe for them all." He paused, looking at Grace through the recovery room window, heard what happened. "Some people..." He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. As they worked, Steve shared local news Mike had missed in his self-imposed isolation. The community center needed volunteers for their youth mentoring program. The local animal shelter was struggling with overcrowding. Pine Valley High's current counselor was overwhelmed with cases. Each piece of information felt like an invitation, a door creaking open. Dr. Torres supervised Grace's first post-surgery examination, her gentle hands checking incisions and monitoring responses. "The next few days are critical," she explained, adjusting Grace's pain medication, "but she's showing remarkable strength. These older injuries, though." She pointed out signs of previous trauma, poorly healed scratches, stress marks on her teeth from likely being chained. "She's been through so much," Mike murmured, stroking Grace's head softly. She leaned into his touch, a gesture of trust that felt like both gift and responsibility. In her eyes, he saw reflected the same resilience he'd witnessed in countless students over the years, the ability to rise above circumstance, to choose trust over fear. The puppies were due for another feeding, and this time Mike handled it with growing confidence. Each tiny life in his hands represented a second chance, not just for them, but perhaps for him as well. Scout's determined attempts to reach Grace, Penny's serious focus, Shadow's quiet patience, and Ruby's protective nature, each personality emerging more clearly with every interaction. Officer Mark Sullivan arrived mid-morning to take Mike's statement about the incident. His jaw tightened as Mike described the dark SUV, the license plate fragment, the deliberate cruelty of the act. "We've had reports of similar incidents in neighboring counties," he revealed, making careful notes. "This might help connect the dots." As Mark prepared to leave, he paused at the recovery room window. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we've been trying to establish a therapy dog program for troubled youth at the station. Once Grace recovers..." He let the suggestion hang in the air, another thread of possibility weaving itself into the Emerging tapestry of purpose. The day continued to unfold with unexpected moments of connection. The hospital's regular clients, hearing Grace's story, offered support in various ways. An elderly woman brought homemade soup for Mike and the staff. A young girl donated her allowance to Grace's care fund. A local pet supply store owner arrived with beds, food, and promises of future support. Each gesture reinforced what Mike had learned during his years of counseling, but had somehow forgotten in his grief. Healing rarely happens in isolation. It requires community, connection, the courage to accept help, and the strength to offer it in return. Light snow dusted Pine Valley as Mike's truck crawled along Cedar Creek Road, precious cargo secured inside. Grace lay sedated in a specially prepared bed in the back seat, while her puppies rode in their carrier beside her, watched over by Emma Wright. The drive home from Mountain View Emergency Animal Hospital felt surreal, as if the past 48 hours existed in some parallel universe where lonely retired counselors suddenly became caretakers of injured dogs. Dr. Torres's instructions echoed in his mind: strict rest for Grace, careful monitoring of her surgical sites, regular medication schedules, and physical therapy exercises once the initial healing began. The responsibility weighed heavily, yet somehow felt right, like picking up a conversation that had been paused rather than starting something new. Emma's quiet voice broke through his thoughts. "The spare room is ready," she said, reaching back to adjust the blanket covering Grace. "Bill helped me move the old desk out and set up the heated bed the hospital recommended." She paused, then added softly, "Jennifer would have loved this." The mention of his late wife no longer stung as sharply as it once had. Instead, Mike found himself imagining Jennifer's delight at their transformed spare room, finally fulfilling its intended purpose of providing sanctuary to those in need. She had always seen the potential in broken things, in broken people. The ranch house emerged from the swirling snow, its windows glowing with welcome light. Steve Patterson's truck sat in the driveway, and through the front window, Mike could see several figures moving inside. The community's response to Grace's story had been swift and overwhelming, a reminder of the connections he'd allowed to fade during his years of grief. Moving Grace from the truck proved challenging, but Steve and Bill Wright appeared with a makeshift stretcher they'd crafted from an old door and blankets. Grace remained calm throughout the transfer, her trust in these humans who had shown her nothing but kindness, a stark contrast to her previous experiences. The spare room had transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the dusty boxes and abandoned projects. In their place stood a comfortable recovery space with soft lighting, easily cleanable floors, and a gentle ramp leading to Grace's bed. Gate Wilson from the local shelter had brought specialized equipment, raised food and water bowls, supportive cushions, and a variety of puppy supplies. "The heating pad is set up," Emma explained, directing them to settle Grace onto her new bed. "And I've organized her medications by schedule." She pointed to a carefully labeled chart on the wall, color-coded and detailed. The retired teacher's organizational skills hadn't dimmed with age. The puppies explored their new space with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Scout immediately began testing the barriers, while Penny methodically investigated every corner. Shadow found a quiet spot near Grace's bed, and Ruby divided her attention between watching her siblings and checking on her mother. Mike's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Torres. "Checking in. How's our girl settling?" The simple text represented another thread in the growing web of support, another reminder that he wasn't facing this challenge alone. Sarah from the hospital had volunteered to stop by after her shift to demonstrate proper wound cleaning and bandage changing techniques. Officer Sullivan was coordinating with other precincts about similar cases, determined to find those responsible. The local newspaper wanted to run a story, not just about Grace's rescue, but about the community's response to it. As Mike watched Grace drift into peaceful sleep, her puppies finally settling around her, Emma appeared at his elbow with a steaming mug of coffee. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "the community center's youth program could benefit from this story. Many of our troubled teens have experienced abandonment themselves. Seeing Grace's journey, helping with her recovery." She let the suggestion linger. The idea took root in Mike's mind, connecting with his years of counseling experience. How many students had he helped through trauma by showing them examples of resilience? Grace's story, her unwavering devotion to her puppies despite abuse, her willingness to trust again, these were powerful messages for young hearts struggling with their own wounds. The day unfolded in a rhythm of medication schedules, puppy feedings, and steady streams of visitors bringing supplies and support. Rachel Chen from the local grocery store arrived with prepared meals. The high school's current counselor, David Martinez, stopped by to discuss possibilities for involving students in Grace's recovery journey. Each interaction carried echoes of Jennifer's influence. She had been the one to teach Mike the importance of community, of letting others in during difficult times. Now, watching Grace accept help from strangers while maintaining her dignity and strength, he understood those lessons anew. As evening approached, Grace showed signs of discomfort. Mike's heart raced as he checked her temperature and surgical sights, remembering Dr. Torres's warnings about potential complications. Emma stayed calm, helping him work through the checklist of warning signs. Everything appeared normal. Grace was simply adjusting to her new environment. The puppies sensed their mother's distress. Scout abandoned his escape attempts, settling close to Grace's head. Penny pressed against her side, while Shadow and Ruby formed protective bookends at her feet. Their instinctive response to their mother's needs demonstrated a loyalty that transcended their young age. Mike found himself sharing stories with Emma as they monitored Grace through the evening. Stories of students he'd counseled, of lives touched and changed. Stories of Jennifer's work with troubled children, her belief in the healing power of art and nature. Stories he hadn't allowed himself to revisit since her death. Grace listened too, her eyes following the conversation as if she understood the importance of this moment. When Mike's voice caught on particularly emotional memories, she would gently nose his hand, offering comfort even in her injured state. The snow continued falling outside, but the house felt warmer than it had in years, not just from the physical presence of its new inhabitants, but from the renewed connections with neighbors, the sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. Late that night, as Mike prepared for bed in his own room, he heard soft whimpers from the spare room. He found Scout had managed to climb onto Grace's bed, snuggling against her while his siblings slept in their designated area. Instead of moving him, Mike sat in the nearby chair, watching mother and pup comfort each other. In the quiet darkness, Grace's eyes met his, reflecting the soft light from the window. There was something in that gaze, wisdom perhaps, or understanding, that reminded him of Jennifer's final days when words had become unnecessary between them, a recognition of shared experience, of pain endured and survived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, physical therapy assessments, wound care, coordinating with various community members who wanted to help. But for now, in this peaceful moment, Mike felt the first real stirrings of healing, not just for Grace and her puppies, but for his own long-buried wounds. Pine Valley's annual winter festival transformed the town square into a wonderland of twinkling lights and seasonal cheer. But Mike Anderson's attention remained focused on the gathering in his living room. Local veterinarian Dr. Rachel Torres sat cross-legged on the floor, examining Grace's healing progress while a small group of high school students watched intently. The teenagers were part of Pine Valley High's new animal care program, a partnership that had emerged organically from Grace's story. David Martinez, The school counselor who had replaced Mike recognized the therapeutic potential in connecting struggling students with rescue animals. Today's group included Maria Santos, a quiet sophomore whose own history of foster care gave her a unique connection to Grace's journey. Dr. Torres guided Maria's hands along Grace's healing leg, explaining the signs of proper bone alignment and tissue recovery. Grace lay perfectly still, her gentle eyes watching the girl with an understanding that transcended species. The other students took notes, their usual teenage restlessness replaced by genuine engagement. Scout, true to his nature, had positioned himself between his mother and the students, appointing himself as unofficial supervisor of Grace's care. His siblings displayed their own distinct personalities during these sessions. Penny observed. From a careful distance, Shadow dozed nearby, but remained alert to his mother's signals, and Ruby alternated between monitoring the proceedings and entertaining the younger students with puppy antics. The sound of car doors closing outside announced new arrivals. Emma Wright entered with Kate Wilson from the shelter, carrying boxes of donated supplies. Behind them came Officer Mark Sullivan, his uniform dusted with fresh snow, his expression carrying news he was eager to share. "We've had a breakthrough," Mark announced once the students had departed for their next class. "That partial plate number you remembered led us to a suspected puppy mill operation in the next county. Grace's markings matched descriptions of a breeding dog that disappeared from their property 6 months ago." The revelation settled heavily in the room. Dr. Torres's hands stilled on Grace's leg as she processed the implications. "That explains the old injuries, the signs of multiple litters," she said softly. Grace pressed her head against the veterinarian's arm, offering comfort even as they discussed her painful past. Kate Wilson pulled out her tablet, revealing photos of the property where Grace had likely spent years in captivity. "The operation's been shut down," she reported. "We're coordinating with rescue organizations across 3 states to rehabilitate the dogs. But we have another situation developing. The local shelter's beyond capacity with the influx." Mike found himself studying the spare room's transformation. What had once been a repository of grief had become a space of healing, not just for Grace and her puppies, but for a growing circle of people touched by their story. An idea began to take shape, one that would have delighted Jennifer. "What if," he began slowly, "we converted the old barn out back? Its solid structure, good bones, with proper renovation." He let the suggestion hang in the air, watching as his guests exchanged thoughtful looks. Emma was the first to respond, her teacher's mind already calculating possibilities. "The community would help," she said confidently. "Steve Patterson mentioned the other day that his construction company's looking for a good cause to support, and the high school's vocational program needs real-world projects." Grace shifted position, drawing everyone's attention. Despite her injuries, she had begun showing signs of wanting to explore beyond the spare room. Her progress inspired others. The students who visited, the community members who followed her story, even Mike himself, who found himself opening doors that had been closed since Jennifer's death. The winter afternoon light filtered through the windows as plans began taking shape. Steve Patterson arrived, summoned by Emma's excited call, his practical contractor's eye already assessing the barn's potential. The structure would need significant work: heating, proper ventilation, secure kennels, a quarantine area for new arrivals. Dr. Torres outlined medical requirements, while Kate added insights from her shelter experience. Officer Sullivan offered to coordinate with local businesses for donations. The project grew larger with each suggestion, yet instead of feeling overwhelming, it felt right. A natural evolution of the promise Mike had made on that snowy night. Grace watched the discussion from her bed, her puppies arranged around her like a furry honor guard. Scout had finally exhausted himself with supervision duties and dozed against his mother's side. Penny maintained her characteristic thoughtful vigil, while Shadow and Ruby engaged in a quiet game of tug-with-rope nearby. The sound of young voices approaching the house signaled the return of the high school students, accompanied by their art teacher, Lisa Chen. They carried sketches, their visions for the barn's transformation into a rehabilitation center. The artwork showed not just kennels and play areas, but spaces for community engagement, education, and healing. Maria's drawing captured particular attention. She had depicted Grace and her puppies in a mural overlooking the entrance, symbols of resilience and second chances. The artistic skill was impressive, but it was the emotional depth that caught Mike's throat. She had captured Grace's gentle wisdom perfectly. As Lisa displayed the students' work, more community members arrived, drawn by the energy of possibility. Rachel Chen from the grocery store offered to coordinate meal deliveries for volunteers. The local hardware store owner pledged building materials. The veterinary hospital staff proposed a partnership for medical care. Grace's story had sparked something in Pine Valley, a reminder of the community's capacity for compassion, its ability to transform tragedy into triumph. The puppy mill revelation, rather than dampening spirits, strengthened resolve. Each person in the room had been touched by Grace's journey in some way, and each brought their own gifts to this expanding mission. The winter day deepened toward evening, but no one seemed eager to leave. Plans continued evolving, roles were assigned, and committees formed naturally. Mike found himself at the center of it all, his counseling experience providing structure to the enthusiasm, his personal journey with Grace lending authenticity to the vision. Dr. Torres completed her examination of Grace with evident satisfaction. "She's ready for more extensive physical therapy," she announced, "and I think some supervised outdoor exploration would be good for her spirit." The news was met with quiet celebration, another milestone in Grace's recovery. As if understanding the significance, Grace rose carefully from her bed. Scout immediately sprang to attention while his siblings gathered close. With gentle determination, she took several steps toward the window overlooking the barn. The movement was steady, her healing leg bearing weight with growing confidence. Mike moved to her side, recognizing the mix of caution and courage in her. Bearing. Together they gazed out at the barn, its weathered frame standing stark against the winter sky. In his mind's eye, he could see Jennifer's artistic touch transforming the space, making it welcoming to both animals and humans in need of healing. The room had grown quiet, everyone sensing the weight of the moment. Grace turned from the window to survey the gathered community, her eyes holding the same wisdom that had first captured Mike's heart on that desperate night. She was no longer just a rescued dog. She had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of the transformative power of compassion. Tomorrow would bring the first steps toward realizing these plans. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But looking at the faces around him, seeing the hope and determination they shared, Mike knew that something extraordinary had begun. From one act of cruelty had sprung 1,000 acts of kindness, each building upon the other to create something larger than themselves. Morning sunlight streamed through the barn's newly installed windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air as volunteers moved purposefully through the space. The transformation of the old structure had begun in earnest, bringing with it a surge of activity that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. Steve Patterson directed a team of local contractors, their tools creating a symphony of construction, sounds that echoed across the property. The barn's sturdy frame had proven sound, but adapting it for its new purpose required significant modifications. Heating systems were being installed, walls insulated, and proper ventilation systems put in place. Maria Santos and her classmates from Pine Valley High worked alongside the adults, their youthful energy infectious as they tackled assigned tasks. The art students had begun sketching their planned mural on the barn's exterior wall, while the woodworking class crafted custom kennels under Steve's guidance. Each piece of the project carried the unique touch of its creators. Grace observed the activity from her new favorite spot on the back porch, her healing legs stretched carefully. Before her, physical therapy had strengthened her muscles, and though she still favored the leg, her mobility improved daily. The puppies, now 3 months old, explored the fenced yard under their mother's watchful eye. Dr. Torres arrived for Grace's morning therapy session, pausing to admire the progress on the barn. The rehabilitation center was taking shape faster than anyone had anticipated, driven by the community's enthusiastic response. Local businesses had donated materials, skilled workers volunteered their time, and monetary contributions flowed steadily into the project fund. Maria approached Grace with quiet confidence, having earned the dog's trust through weeks of gentle interaction. Under Dr. Torres's guidance, she helped Grace through her exercises, celebrating each small victory. The teenager's own transformation was evident in her growing self-assurance and the way she now engaged with others. Scout bounded over to investigate the therapy session, his white chest now a distinctive flag announcing his approach. His siblings followed at varying paces, Penny with her characteristic careful observation, Shadow moving silently as his name suggested, and Ruby maintaining her protective watch over the group. Emma Wright emerged from the house carrying a tray of refreshments for the volunteers, her teachers' organization's skills proving invaluable in coordinating the project's many aspects. The local coffee shop had begun providing daily deliveries of coffee and pastries, turning break time into informal community meetings where ideas flowed freely. Kate Wilson arrived with news from the shelter network. More puppy mill survivors had been identified, each with stories that echoed Grace's past. The rehabilitation center's completion had taken on greater urgency as the need for specialized care facilities grew. Grace seemed to sense the importance of their mission, her gentle presence inspiring everyone involved. Officer Sullivan's police cruiser pulled into the driveway, bringing updates on the ongoing investigation. The scope of the puppy mill operation had proven larger than initially suspected, crossing state lines and involving multiple properties. Grace's rescue had sparked a chain of discoveries that would impact countless animal lives. The sound of lumber being unloaded drew attention to a new arrival. Lisa Chen's art supply store van had arrived with materials for the mural project. The design, refined through collaboration between students and local artists, would tell Grace's story while celebrating the community's response to tragedy. Jennifer's artistic influence seemed present in every brushstroke planned. Inside the barn, the transformation continued. The medical treatment area took shape under Dr. Torres's guidance, equipped with donated veterinary supplies and designed for both efficiency and comfort. The recovery kennels incorporated elements of home-like comfort, moving away from traditional, institutional designs. A group of students worked on the community education space, where programs would teach responsible pet ownership and facilitate interactions between rescued animals and people in need of healing companionship. The high school's psychology class had proposed workshops connecting animal rehabilitation with human emotional recovery. Grace's afternoon therapy session attracted an audience of volunteers taking their lunch break. Her determination inspired them, each small step forward, mirroring the progress of their larger project. The puppies participated in their own way, with Scout demonstrating the exercises alongside his mother, while his siblings offered moral support. Mike found himself moving between groups, his counseling experience helping bridge different perspectives and resolve minor conflicts. The skills he'd honed over decades of working with students found new application in coordinating the diverse personalities drawn to the project. Grace watched his interactions with apparent approval, her wise eyes following his movements. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. A representative from a national animal welfare organization had heard about the Rehabilitation Center project and came to offer support. The possibility of expanding their impact beyond Pine Valley added new energy to the day's work, though Mike remained focused on their immediate community's needs. Maria's art class began work on their section of the mural, their brushes bringing color to the barn's weathered walls. The design incorporated elements of hope and healing, with Grace and her puppies featured prominently. The students had insisted on including subtle references to Jennifer's artistic style, a tribute that touched Mike deeply. As the day progressed, Grace attempted her first visit to the barn's interior. Her cautious exploration drew quiet attention from the workers, who paused to watch her investigate their progress. Scout stuck close to her side, while his siblings spread out to examine different areas, each approaching the new space in their characteristic ways. The Rehabilitation Center's layout had evolved through careful planning and practical necessity. Beyond the medical and recovery areas, spaces were designed for socialization, training, and the special needs of traumatized animals. The community gathering area would host educational programs and support groups, recognizing the interconnected nature of human and animal healing. Dr. Torres observed Grace's interaction with the space, noting how she seemed to understand its purpose. The dog's journey from victim to inspiration had influenced every aspect of the center's design, ensuring that future residents would find the same blend of professional care and emotional support that had facilitated her recovery. The day's work wound down as sunset approached, but the energy remained high. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and progress, each day moving them closer to their goal. The puppies, tired from their exploration, gathered around Grace as she made her way back to the house, their small family a living testament to resilience and hope. Mike stood in the barn's doorway, watching the last light paint the sky in brilliant colors. The structure's transformation mirrored his own journey of the past months, from isolation to purposeful engagement. Grace's presence beside him offered silent support, her wisdom somehow encompassing understanding of both past pain and future possibility. The community's response to Grace's story had created something larger than a simple rescue facility. They were building a place where healing could happen on multiple levels, where the connection between human and animal spirits could foster recovery and growth. Each nail driven, each wall painted, each system installed carried the energy of that shared vision. As volunteers gathered their tools and prepared to leave for the day, the sense of shared purpose remained palpable. Tomorrow would bring new progress, new challenges, and new opportunities for transformation. The Rehabilitation Center was becoming more than a building. It was becoming a symbol of what was possible when compassion overcame cruelty, when community rose to meet challenge with hope. Spring arrived in Pine Valley with a gentle persistence, melting snow revealing the first tender shoots of green across Mike Anderson's property. The Rehabilitation Center stood proudly against the awakening landscape, its fresh paint gleaming in the morning light. Inside, final preparations were underway for the arrival of their first official residents, 3 dogs rescued from situations similar to Grace's. Kate Wilson supervised the installation of new equipment, her shelter experience proving invaluable in anticipating the needs of traumatized animals. The recovery kennels had been designed with input from animal behaviorists, creating spaces that felt secure rather than confining. Natural light filtered through strategically placed windows, while sound-dampening materials helped maintain a calming atmosphere. Grace had taken to spending her mornings in the center's main office, her presence adding a living testimony to the facility's purpose. Her injured leg had healed remarkably well, though she retained a slight limp that Dr. Torres said might always remain. Rather than diminishing her, this small imperfection seemed to make her more approachable to the steady stream of visitors drawn to the center. The puppies, now young dogs themselves, had developed distinct roles within the operation. Scout's boundless energy made him perfect for encouraging timid dogs to play, while Penny's gentle nature helped calm anxious newcomers. Shadow had become particularly attuned to signs of distress in both animals and humans, and Ruby's protective instincts made her an excellent supervisor of group interactions. Maria Santos arrived early that morning, her school project on animal-assisted therapy having evolved into a formal proposal for the center's youth outreach program. The quiet teenager had blossomed over the past months, her connection with Grace giving her the confidence to share her own story of foster care and resilience with others. The sound of vehicles approaching drew attention to the driveway. Officer Sullivan's cruiser led a small convoy, transport vans carrying their first official resident. The moment carried weight beyond the practical, representing the transition from vision to reality. Grace watched from her office window, her wise eyes taking in the careful orchestration of the arrival. Veterinary staff moved with practiced efficiency, following protocols developed through consultation with specialists across the country. Each new arrival would undergo thorough medical examination before beginning their rehabilitation journey. Dr. Torres had assembled a team committed to addressing both physical and emotional trauma, understanding how intertwined these aspects of recovery could be. The first dog, a trembling collie mix, emerged from the transport van. Her physical injuries had healed, but fear kept her crouched low, eyes darting for escape routes. Grace's ears perked up, and she moved purposefully toward the entrance. Mike watched in amazement as she positioned herself near the doorway, not approaching directly, but creating a calming presence that seemed to say, "You're safe here." Scout, sensing the importance of the moment, contained his usual exuberance. Instead, he followed his mother's example, settling quietly nearby. His siblings distributed themselves naturally around the space, each contributing to the atmosphere of security and welcome that they had learned to create through their own journey of healing. Emma Wright arrived with a group of community volunteers, each trained in the center's procedures. The rehabilitation program would rely heavily on dedicated local support, creating connections that benefited both the animals and the humans involved in their care. Among the volunteers were several of Mike's former students, their own experiences with overcoming challenges drawing them to the project. Throughout the morning, each new resident was carefully settled into their specially prepared space. The center's design allowed for observation without intrusion, giving the dogs time to acclimate at their own pace. Grace seemed to understand the process intuitively, her calm demeanor providing reassurance to both the new arrivals and their caretakers. Maria worked alongside the staff, her own trauma-informed perspective adding valuable insights to their approach. She had developed a particular bond with the collie mix, recognizing in the dog's fearful behavior echoes of her own past experiences. The parallel between human and animal healing had become a cornerstone of the center's philosophy. The community gathering space hosted its first informal meeting that afternoon, bringing together volunteers, staff, and local supporters. The discussion centered on expanding their outreach programs, connecting with other rehabilitation facilities, and developing educational initiatives. Grace lay in her favorite spot near the window, Scout at her feet, while her other puppies moved among the participants, offering their own form of comfort and connection. Dr. Torres presented their rehabilitation protocol, a comprehensive approach that incorporated the latest research in animal behavior with lessons learned from Grace's recovery. The center would serve not only as a healing space for abused animals, but as a training facility for veterinary students and animal welfare workers, sharing their developing expertise with a wider network of caregivers. Mike found himself sharing stories of Grace's journey, each milestone in her recovery, illuminating the path forward for their new residents. The transformation of his property from a place of isolation to a center of healing and hope seemed to reflect a larger truth about the power of community to overcome darkness with light. Lisa Chen and her art students had completed the mural along the center's main hallway, their artwork telling stories of rescue and renewal. Grace's image served as a central theme, her gentle strength captured in flowing lines and soft colors that seemed to move with the changing light. Jennifer's artistic influence lived on in the details, a legacy of beauty rising from pain. The day's activities wound down as evening approached, but the center hummed with purpose. Each space had been carefully designed to serve multiple functions. Recovery areas that could transform into training rooms, meeting spaces that welcomed both professional conferences and community gatherings, quiet corners where healing could unfold at its own pace. Officer Sullivan returned with updates on the ongoing investigation into animal abuse cases across the region. The center's establishment had created a vital resource for law enforcement, providing specialized care for rescued animals while building evidence for prosecution. Grace's story had become a catalyst for systemic change, inspiring new legislation and enforcement priorities. As twilight softened the spring sky, Mike stood in the center's doorway, watching Grace guide her puppies in their evening routine. Their small family had grown into something larger, their journey of healing touching lives far beyond the boundaries of Pine Valley. The rehabilitation center stood as testimony to the possibility of transformation, not just for the animals in their care, but for the human hearts drawn to participate in their recovery. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories of survival, new opportunities for healing. But tonight, as the first stars appeared above the mountains, the quiet courage of one mother dog continued to light the way forward, showing how love could triumph over cruelty, how community could grow. From compassion, how purpose could emerge from pain. News of the rehabilitation center's success spread through regional animal welfare networks like ripples on a mountain lake. Organizations from neighboring states began reaching out, seeking guidance in establishing similar programs. Mike found himself hosting delegations of shelter managers and veterinary professionals, each eager to understand the unique approach that had evolved from Grace's story. The summer sun cast long shadows across the exercise yard as Mike led a group of visitors through the facility. A therapy session was underway, with Maria Santos demonstrating techniques they'd developed for working with traumatized animals. The collie mix, now named Hope, participated in the demonstration, her transformation from terrified newcomer to confident assistant, serving as powerful testimony to their methods. Grace supervised the proceedings from her customary spot, her presence lending authority to the program. Her puppies, now young adults, had become integral members of the rehabilitation team. Scout's playful nature helped break through the shells of the most withdrawn dogs, while Penny's patience made her perfect for working with elderly or injured residents. Shadow's intuitive understanding of emotional states proved invaluable in assessing new arrivals, and Ruby's protective instincts helped maintain harmony among the center's growing population. Dr. Torres had expanded the medical program to include innovative treatments for both physical and psychological trauma. The combination of traditional veterinary care with behavioral therapy was showing remarkable results. Each success story added to their understanding, building a knowledge base that they eagerly shared with other facilities. The community education space hosted daily activities, from school groups learning about animal welfare to support sessions for people working through their own trauma alongside the rescued dogs. Emma Wright coordinated a program matching senior citizens with gentle resident dogs, creating relationships that brought healing to both species. Kate Wilson arrived with urgent news. Another puppy mill had been discovered in a neighboring county. The operation's scale would challenge their resources, but the network of support they'd built stood ready to respond. Officer Sullivan was already coordinating with local law enforcement, while shelter partners prepared to assist with the incoming animals. Maria's youth outreach program had grown beyond initial expectations. Troubled teens found purpose in volunteering. Their own healing journeyed paralleling those of the dogs in their care. The high school's counseling department reported improved outcomes among students involved with the center, leading to discussions about expanding the program to other schools. Lisa Chen and her art students had begun work on a new project, creating a series of photographs documenting the rehabilitation process. Their images captured moments of connection and breakthrough, telling stories of recovery that words alone couldn't convey. The exhibition would travel to other facilities, spreading awareness of their work while inspiring hope. A commotion near the entrance drew attention as Steve Patterson arrived with his construction crew. The center's success had necessitated expansion, and plans for a new wing were underway. The design incorporated lessons learned from their first year of operation, creating spaces that would enhance their ability to serve both animal and human needs. Grace approached the construction site with interest, Scout bouncing excitedly at her side. Despite her slight limp, she moved with dignity through the property she'd helped transform. Her influence extended beyond the physical space. Her spirit of resilience and forgiveness had become the heart of their approach to rehabilitation. The afternoon brought a special ceremony as Hope graduated from the rehabilitation program. Her adoption by a local family marked another success story, though she would continue visiting the center as a therapy dog. Grace watched the proceedings with what seemed like maternal pride, her own journey having paved the way for so many others. Dr. Torres shared updated statistics with the visiting professionals, recovery rates significantly higher than national averages, adoption success stories that defied expectations, and groundbreaking research emerging from their documentation of the rehabilitation process. The medical community had taken notice, leading to partnerships with veterinary schools and behavioral research programs. Mike found himself remembering that snowy night that had started it all, marveling at how one act of rescue had grown into something so far-reaching. Jennifer would have loved seeing their home become a beacon of hope, the locked spare room now, just one small part of a larger mission of healing. The center's approach to rehabilitation had evolved to recognize the unique story of each animal in their care. Some, like Hope, found new homes and families. Others, still working through deeper trauma, stayed on as permanent residents, contributing to the healing of newcomers in their own ways. The program's flexibility allowed for different paths to recovery, respecting individual needs and timelines. Grace's puppies demonstrated this diversity of purpose. Scout's energy made him an excellent therapy dog for children's programs, while Penny's gentle nature suited her for work with elderly visitors. Shadow's sensitivity led him to specialize in helping the most traumatized newcomers, and Ruby's protective instincts made her invaluable in maintaining the center's peaceful atmosphere. As evening approached, the visiting professionals gathered for a final discussion. Their questions reflected genuine interest in replicating elements of the program in their own facilities. Mike shared openly, emphasizing how their success grew from the combination of professional expertise and community involvement, each element strengthening the others. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold as the day's activities wound down. Grace led her family in their evening routine, each puppy now grown into their role while maintaining the close bonds formed during their early trauma and recovery. Their unity offered hope to new arrivals, showing how trust could be rebuilt. After betrayal, Officer Sullivan stopped by with an update on the pending animal welfare legislation inspired by Grace's case. The law would strengthen penalties for abuse while providing funding for rehabilitation programs. Grace's story had touched hearts beyond Pine Valley, influencing policymakers and enforcement priorities across the state. Mike stood in the gathering, dusk, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the facility that had grown from tragedy and triumph. The rehabilitation center had become more than a place of healing. It was a testament to the power of community, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with proper care and understanding. Winter returned to Pine Valley with unexpected force, unleashing a blizzard that blanketed the rehabilitation center in pristine white. The storm's ferocity stirred memories in Mike Anderson as he secured the facility's windows against howling winds. Grace pressed close to his side, her own recollections of that fateful night perhaps surfacing as thunder rattled the window panes. An urgent call from Officer Sullivan cut through the storm's ambient roar. Another incident on Route 156. A truck carrying rescue animals had skidded off the road. Emergency services were responding, but the closest veterinary help was the rehabilitation center. The parallel to Grace's rescue struck Mike with physical force as he gathered emergency supplies and contacted Dr. Torres. The center's emergency protocol activated smoothly, staff and volunteers responding despite treacherous conditions. Grace watched the preparations with keen interest, her puppies falling into their trained response patterns. Scout and Ruby accompanied the rescue team, their experience with traumatized animals potentially crucial in the field. Penny and Shadow remained behind with Grace to help manage the center's current residents. Dr. Torres arrived as Mike finished loading the rescue vehicle with medical supplies. The storm had intensified, but the memory of another snowy night when help had been desperately needed drove them forward. The rehabilitation center's four-wheel drive transport van, donated by a local business, proved its worth as they navigated the treacherous mountain roads. Maria Santos arrived breathless at the center, having convinced her parents to bring her when she heard about the emergency. Her trauma-informed perspective had become invaluable in crisis situations. She joined Emma Wright in preparing the intake areas while Kate Wilson coordinated with regional shelters for possible overflow support. The scene at the accident site hit Mike with déjà vu, swirling snow, flashing emergency lights, and the sounds of animals in distress. The transport truck had avoided a head-on collision with a sliding car but ended up partially off the road. Inside, crates held dogs being relocated from an overcrowded southern shelter to rescue partners in the northwest. Scout's training kicked in immediately as he helped calm the frightened animals, while rescue workers and center staff assessed the situation. Ruby patrolled the perimeter, her protective instincts alert for any additional threats. The skills they'd developed through the rehabilitation program found practical application in this real-world crisis. Each rescued dog received initial assessment in the field before careful transport to the center. Dr. Torres worked efficiently, her experience with trauma cases enabling quick decisions about priority and treatment. The parallels to Grace's rescue grew stronger as they loaded the last animal into their transport van, the storm still raging around them. Back at the center, Grace supervised the incoming cases with remarkable focus. Her presence seemed to calm the new arrivals, as if they sensed her understanding of their fear and confusion. The facility's design proved its worth as they efficiently processed each case, providing immediate medical attention while maintaining a peaceful environment. Local media arrived to cover the rescue, but Mike's attention remained fixed on the animals. A particular case caught his eye: a mother dog with a recently weaned pup, their crate tags indicating they were the last of a family separated by the realities of the shelter system. Grace approached their kennel with special interest, her own experience perhaps resonating with their situation. The night unfolded in a blur of activity as staff and volunteers worked to settle the new arrivals. The mother dog, whom they named Winter, responded to Grace's presence with visible relief. Her pup, dubbed Frost, found immediate kinship with Scout, who gentled his usual exuberance to accommodate the youngster's timidity. Maria worked with the newly arrived dogs, her own journey from trauma to healing informing her approach. The Rehabilitation Center's youth program had given her skills that now proved invaluable in crisis response. Her quiet confidence bore little resemblance to the shy teenager who had first connected with Grace months ago. Dawn broke over the mountains, revealing a transformed landscape of pristine snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind both challenge and opportunity. The accident's timing proved fortuitous. The Rehabilitation Center's resources and experienced staff could provide specialized care that might have been unavailable elsewhere. Word of the rescue spread through Pine Valley's tight-knit community. Support arrived in various forms: hot meals for the overnight staff, additional volunteers offering assistance, and local businesses providing needed supplies. The response reflected how deeply the Rehabilitation Center had woven itself into the community's fabric. Dr. Torres completed her rounds, checking on each new arrival while monitoring their existing residents. The center's expansion had been timely, providing adequate space for emergency situations while maintaining proper care for their regular rehabilitation cases. Grace accompanied the veterinarian, her calming presence seemingly understood and appreciated by each animal they visited. Winter and Frost's case particularly touched the staff. Their story of separation and reunion amid crisis resonated with Grace's journey, though their circumstances differed. The Rehabilitation Center's philosophy of treating each case as unique, while learning from past experiences, guided their approach to helping this new family heal and thrive. The community gathering space transformed into a command center as Kate coordinated with regional partners. The accident had highlighted the need for emergency response protocols specific to animal transport. The Rehabilitation Center's experience would help develop guidelines for future crisis situations. Lisa Chen arrived with her camera, documenting the rescue operation for the center's ongoing chronicle. Her artistic eye captured poignant moments. Scout guiding Frost through initial examinations, Ruby standing guard over the recovery kennels, Grace offering silent support to Winter. Each image told part of a larger story about healing and hope. Mike found himself drawn to the window where he and Grace often stood, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape. The parallel between this night and the one that had brought Grace into his life struck him anew. The Rehabilitation Center had grown from personal tragedy into a resource capable of responding to larger crises, each experience adding to their ability to help others. The following days would bring new challenges as they integrated the accident survivors into their rehabilitation program. Some would stay briefly before continuing their journey to other facilities, while others, like Winter and Frost, might need extended care. The center's flexibility and experienced staff stood ready to meet each need as it arose. Grace's influence permeated every aspect of their response. Her journey from victim to healer had created a template for rehabilitation that emphasized individual dignity while recognizing the power of community support. Each new case benefited from the wisdom gained through her recovery, though each followed its own unique path to healing. Spring flowers dotted the rehabilitation center's grounds as Pine Valley prepared for its first annual Animal Welfare Conference. Delegates from across the country gathered to learn about the innovative approaches that had emerged from Grace's story. The main conference hall, recently added to accommodate growing interest in their programs, buzzed with anticipation as Mike Anderson prepared to deliver the keynote address. Grace accompanied him to the podium, her presence lending authenticity to every word. The gathered professionals fell silent as Mike shared not just their methodology, but the deeper truths they'd discovered about healing. Through their work with traumatized animals, they'd uncovered universal principles about recovery, trust, and the power of unconditional acceptance. The conference showcased success stories from their first 2 years of operation. Winter and Frost, now thriving therapy dogs themselves, demonstrated rehabilitation techniques alongside Scout and Ruby. Penny worked with a group of elderly visitors, showing how gentle interaction could benefit both species. Shadow's intuitive abilities had developed into a formal assessment protocol that other facilities were eager to implement. Maria Santos presented research findings from her senior project, documenting the parallel healing journeys of rescued animals and troubled youth. Her data showed remarkable improvements in emotional regulation, trust building, and social connection among program participants. Universities had expressed interest in expanding the study, recognizing the potential applications in human trauma recovery. Dr. Torres shared medical protocols developed through their experience with complex cases. The combination of physical rehabilitation and emotional support had produced recovery rates that challenged traditional expectations. Grace's influence showed in their emphasis on allowing each animal to progress at its own pace, while providing consistent, gentle encouragement. The afternoon sessions focused on community engagement, with Emma Wright leading discussions about volunteer coordination and public education. The rehabilitation center's success relied heavily on community support, creating a model that other facilities could adapt to their local circumstances. Lisa Chen's photography exhibition illustrated the transformation of both animals and humans involved in the program. Officer Sullivan participated in a panel discussion about law enforcement partnerships. The rehabilitation center's work had influenced regional police training, helping officers better understand and respond to animal cruelty cases. Grace's story often featured in these sessions, demonstrating how proper response and rehabilitation could transform tragedy into triumph. Kate Wilson organized workshops on shelter networking and emergency response protocols. The winter rescue operation had highlighted the importance of coordinated efforts among animal welfare organizations. Representatives from transport companies attended these sessions, eager to implement safer practices for animal relocation. Between presentations, attendees toured the facility's newest additions. The expanded medical wing featured state-of-the-art rehabilitation equipment, while the behavioral assessment area incorporated insights gained from hundreds of cases. The community education space hosted rotating displays about animal welfare and human-animal bonds. Steve Patterson guided groups through the residential areas, explaining how architectural elements supported the rehabilitation process. Natural light, sound management, and flexible spaces allowed for customized treatment plans. The design incorporated feedback from staff, volunteers, and careful observation of animal responses to different environments. Local businesses set up displays highlighting community partnership opportunities. The hardware store's pet supply section had evolved to specialize in rehabilitation equipment, while the art supply store offered materials for animal-assisted therapy programs. Rachel Chen's grocery store had developed a pet food bank, supporting families facing financial hardship. The conference's impact extended beyond professional development. Connections formed between facilities, creating networks for resource sharing and emergency response. Grace's influence touched each interaction, her story inspiring others to look beyond traditional approaches to animal welfare. Evening brought a special ceremony honoring the center's success stories. Former residents and their adoptive families shared experiences of healing and growth. Winter and frost demonstrated their therapy work, showing how formerly traumatized animals could become agents of healing for others. Grace watched from her place of honor, her quiet dignity touching everyone present. Maria's youth group presented a multimedia project documenting the center's evolution. Images of the original barn's transformation paralleled stories of personal change among program participants. The youngest members worked with Scout, showing how play therapy could help overcome fear and build confidence. Dr. Torres unveiled plans for a veterinary internship program focusing on trauma-informed animal care. Several universities had expressed interest in partnering with the center, recognizing the value of their innovative approaches. Grace's puppies would play key roles in training new practitioners, each contributing their unique perspectives to the learning process. The conference's success reflected broader changes in animal welfare approaches. Facilities across the country had begun implementing elements of their rehabilitation model, adapting the principles of patience, individual dignity, and community involvement to their own circumstances. Grace's journey had sparked a movement toward more compassionate and effective treatment methods. Local media coverage highlighted the center's economic impact on Pine Valley. Tourism had increased as people visited the facility, while the conference brought additional revenue to area businesses. More importantly, the community had developed a stronger sense of purpose and connection through their involvement with the rehabilitation program. As twilight approached, Mike found quiet moments to reflect on their journey. The rehabilitation center had grown beyond his initial vision, touching lives in ways he never imagined. Grace's influence extended far beyond Pine Valley, creating ripples of change throughout the animal welfare community. The conference would conclude with a candlelight ceremony celebrating the human-animal bond. Grace would lead a procession of success stories, each representing hope and healing. Her own journey from victim to teacher had opened hearts and minds to new possibilities in animal rehabilitation. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges and opportunities, but tonight they celebrated how far they'd come. The Rehabilitation Center stood as testament to the power of compassion, proving that even the darkest circumstances could lead to light. Grace's legacy lived on in every life touched by their work, in every story of renewal and recovery.